I did a very snowy book, Tom Finger, back in 2002 for Bloomsbury, and for this book, where there was snow, I left the page blank white. With my present book, I'm keen to have some texture, so I'm going to show how I get the sparkly, knobbly, bobbly look of the snow in this book. Before I apply my watercolour wash, I have to apply drawing gum or masking fluid to block off the areas where I don't want the wash to spread. So I have a special pen for this because it rather clogs up pens, and I just paint it on, following the lines and the contours. And these are all areas I'm trying to keep separated from one another. I'm just protecting now my little character Todd from the wash which will go around there. I'm putting on a bit extra on this part so that the wash doesn't spread onto the white page. And now I leave it all to dry. I'll mix up my colour for the wash. I'm using these little professional Winsor & Newton watercolour. The colours I'm going to use are Cobalt Light, this blue here, and I'm adding to it this colour, which is light red, ending up a sort of grey colour. I don't want it too dark, so I add a bit of water to it. So using a really big wash brush, I'm now going to put the wash on within these areas. You see I'm using it very wet. I'm now going to add the salt, and you see this is rock salt grains, and you add them where there's quite a lot of watercolour wash. It needs to be quite wet for the grains to dissolve. So I left my salt wash overnight, and now is the exciting moment when I take off the masking fluid. The way I get it off is just with my thumb. Where you've got smaller areas, like here, you might have to use a craft knife to loosen it a bit. And one of the effects of rubbing your masking fluid or your drawing gum off with your thumb where there's salt is you can actually get blisters. Have been known to use these protective things. What I love about this technique is that it's almost like objet trouvé, where you just don't know what you're going to find, because the pigment and the salt have a wonderful way of arranging themselves. The temptation is to put too much salt in, and then you would get an area probably a bit like this, dense. That area is nice because the salt grains have dissolved and formed these little tiny salty areas. If there's too much pigment in the wash, it will come too dark like that, and you might have to remedy it afterwards. Another thing you want to avoid is messing around with your wash, i.e. tilting the whole board to get it more even, which might result in the fact that the salt doesn't dissolve at all. There's a sort of area there where there's no texture at all. When you peel all this stuff off, you have great surprises. Then you work from it. You edit it all by hand afterwards. So this is a rigger, this brush. One of the things I can do when I come to touching up is to use the same colours and then hand paint areas like that. I can also touch up areas where I want to actually remove the white. So I put my titanium white. I'm probably not using a rigger here, but using flatter, shorter brush. I brush across the surface and you see where the salt is and the dots are. The white sticks, but not to the actual colour underneath. And this way I'm getting my snowy texture. Where there's a sort of rather blank bit, I often like to add a snowflake. And this is the sort of effect I want to get, which is really quite sparkly and decorative and very different from using just the white page as my snow. I'll show you how I do Todd's fur. Again, I like texture. With a full brush, I either wet or put on a very pale wash, and then with a pen, where I've got the lines of the fur penciled in where I can see them, I scratch them. And in Todd's case, I'm using raw umber with a tiny bit of gold added to it. When I put the wash on, it clings to those scratches and makes it much more textured. I also scratch the outline. Or sometimes I even scratch it with the craft knife. So here, for example, I'm using the craft knife. Now if I put a darker wash on once it's finished, it will darken the scratches more than the actual wash area behind. So it's just a way, instead of using a paintbrush or a ink pen to get these lines, I'm getting them in a slightly unpredictable way by scratching. I'm putting some white gouache on where the fur is white. The white on his front, and the white on his tail, and the white on his paws. To complete Todd, I need to just do his eyes and his nose. I've mixed from Payne's Grey and the Cobalt Blue Dark and Burnt Umber, rather than pure black. To get the edge, I use a very fine brush.